The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on Wisconsin perspectives on the Biden-Harris border crisis. Without objection, Representatives Stile, Van Orden, and Grothman will be permitted to participate in today's hearing for the purpose of questioning the witnesses and will receive 5 minutes to do so. Without objection, I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Well, good morning. I want to thank my colleagues for making the trip from all parts of the country and my fellow Wisconsinites for hosting us here today. The committee is conducting a series of these hearings to hear from Americans across the U.S. about how the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies, which impede immigration enforcement and encourage illegal immigration, are affecting their communities. And we've been having these hearings this entire session of Congress from McAllen, Texas, Yuma, Arizona, San Diego, and now we are here in Milwaukee, as every state is a border state. Since taking office on January 20th, 2021, the Biden-Harris administration has allowed at least 7.6 million illegal aliens into the United States, more than the entire population of Wisconsin and 36 other states. President Biden and Border Czar Vice President Kamala Harris created this crisis by systematically dismantling effective border measures and their refusal to enforce our immigration laws in the interior of the United States. They've released millions of illegal aliens stopped at the border into our country and abused our laws to fly millions more directly into American communities, making every state a border state. The results have been tragic, with foreign migrants flooding into American communities from coast to coast, straining social services and leaving a trail of innocent victims in their wake. The price tag alone is staggering, reaching into the hundreds of billions. Even worse, most of these costs are borne by state and local governments, many of which now face catastrophic strains on their hospitals, schools, and social safety net programs, which are supposed to take care of Americans, not a never-ending tidal wave of illegal aliens. In Arizona, I learned that a border hospital spent $26 million in a single year on uncompensated care for the illegal aliens pouring in. In New York City, they expect to spend $12 billion over the next 3 years on housing, food, health care, and other services for illegal aliens. Wisconsin is not immune, as we've seen in Whitewater, where local resources have been strained by an influx of migrants after the Biden-Harris administration flooded the town with nearly 1,000 migrants. It's about more than just dollars and cents. It's also about the human cost. Over the past 3 years, Americans have been confronted with countless reports of brutal rapes, kidnappings, murders of women and girls by illegal aliens in states far from the southern border: Maryland, Missouri, New York, Georgia, Florida, and Wisconsin. No one is immune. In Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, a Venezuelan illegal alien released by Biden and Harris sexually assaulted a woman and abused a child after sanctuary jurisdictions like Minneapolis failed to report his crimes to ICE for deportation. In Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, an illegal alien from Nicaragua who was released by Biden-Harris administration tried to sexually assault a 12-year-old girl. In Abbotsford, Wisconsin, my district, an illegal alien stabbed 3 people over 15 times, killing 2 children. In Rusk County, Wisconsin, that's near Ladysmith, for those of you who are familiar with Rusk County, an illegal alien whose license had already been revoked for a previous OWI conviction but was not deported, tragically killed a father of 3. Under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, fentanyl deaths in Wisconsin have also reached an all-time high, claiming thousands of lives. In Green Bay, an illegal alien was busted after selling fentanyl-laced pills near a middle school and at a Boys and Girls Club. A Boys and Girls Club. While these are just a few tragic stories resulting from border czar Kamala Harris's open border, it's clear that these dangerous individuals should not be here. While the Biden-Harris administration misleadingly claims that its policies are working, the administration has made America less safe and less secure. The fact of the matter is, the president has the authority to stop this. Trump did, Biden did not, and Harris will not. Today we will hear from officials and residents in Wisconsin who have had firsthand experience with the chaos being inflicted on their communities because of President Biden and border czar Kamala Harris's open border. We will take a brief recess. We are having some AV issues. We'll stand in recess for a moment. Committee will come to order. We're now going to introduce today's first panel. The Honorable Ron Johnson, the senior senator from Wisconsin, was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010. Prior to that, for 30 years, he ran a successful manufacturing business in Oshkosh. He serves on the Senate Budget Committee, Finance Committee, and Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, which he chaired from 2015 to 2021. Senator, we welcome you to this hearing this morning, and you may begin your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, members of Congress. I really want to thank the Judiciary Committee for agreeing to hold this field hearing here in Wisconsin, where we can highlight the tragedies that are occurring as a result of the Biden-Harris open border policy right here in our state of Wisconsin. It's often said that every state's a border state, and that's absolutely true. And you're going to be hearing some powerful testimony from local sheriffs, from Rick and Aaron Rockwell, who tragically lost their son to fentanyl overdose. So rather than concentrate on those tragic stories, because that's going to be well covered in your second panel, what I thought I would do is basically utilize my time as chairman, the former chairman of Homeland Security. Over 6 years, we held something like 36 hearings on some aspect of our illegal immigration, when it was far less worse than it is today. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to use basically 3 charts that tell the story of how we ended up in this place right now. And we'll start with the first chart I began preparing as chairman of Homeland Security had to do with the unaccompanied children. You can see by this chart, 2009, 2010, 2011, we had a kind of a normal number of unaccompanied children coming to this country, somewhere under 4,000. And then what is the spark to all these crises ever since was the improper misuse of prosecutorial discretion, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals. And Obama issued those memorandum in 2012, and you can see how all of a sudden the number of unaccompanied children coming to this country spiked, went up to 10,000. The following year, 20,000. 2014 hit a high for that point in time. Over 51,000 unaccompanied children came to this country. What was happening over those couple of years is people in Central America and elsewhere around the world realized that something had changed in America's immigration policy. I remember Senator Cornyn coming to Senate lunches talking about how he's hearing that in Central America they're being told that you're going to get a white piece of paper called a permiso to come to this country. It wasn't a permission, it was a notice to appear. But that's how they basically took this change because of DACA and sparked a crisis. The next thing that happened is, in addition to unaccompanied children, is people got wise and they started coming into the country with their children or somebody else's child. And so we had a huge spike in family units. In 2014, over 68,000 family units exploited our asylum laws. So, Obama noticed that. And he took action. He started detaining families, and it worked, because the next year in 2015, family units declined almost in half to 39,800. But then, the immigration groups took the Obama administration to court because they didn't like anybody being detained. They were all in for catch and release, and you had a reinterpretation of the 1997 Flores Settlement Agreement, which stated that the DHS had to also consider accompanied children as part of that Flores agreement. In other words, they had to release into the custody of HHS children, even if they are accompanied by their parents, within 20 days. So the Obama administration had a decision to make. Were they going to, and by the way, the court would have allowed them to release the child into custody of HHS and detain their parents, or release the entire family. The Obama administration decided to release the family, and the result sparked the crisis that we're still living today. We can go on to my next chart. By the way, one of the things that we were supposed to do in terms of the whole family unit was we were supposed to do DNA testing to make sure that those actually were their children. DHS has never fully implemented DNA testing. I would say they're actually violating laws on the books to force them to do that, and we're not doing it. We actually held a hearing in June of 2019. And by the way, Vice President Harris was on my committee at that point in time, where we heard testimony of a child being sold for $84 to create a fake family unit to exploit our asylum laws. So, by the way, so the Biden administration knows, what they are causing. This is a chart that I have been developing and updating on a monthly basis. The one I gave to President Trump in April of 2024 that he's been using his rallies. But what I've always liked about this chart is it shows the cause and effect. And so I'd kind of like to just kind of walk through it. Again, you can see 2012, DACA was announced. 2014, in the height of that crisis, Obama declared a humanitarian crisis when they were dealing with 2,000 illegal immigrants coming across the border a day, being encountered, 2,000. I remember DHS Secretary Jay Johnson at that point in time said 1,000 a day was a really bad day and he was going to be in a really bad mood. 2015, you had the Flores reinterpretation, and when Trump took office after campaigning to close the border, people in Central America took that seriously. And so you saw a pretty dramatic dip in people trying to come to this country illegally, but unfortunately the laws didn't change. And Congress would do nothing to change the laws. They wouldn't do anything to strengthen a president's authority to secure the border. And so President Trump had to deal with his own surge. But he dealt with it. In 2018, the Supreme Court ruled that the president exudes deference. Current law exudes deference to the president to deal with the border, and he did so. So he initiated the Migrant Protection Program, otherwise known as Remain in Mexico, initiated and did agreements in Central America, the safe third countries, threatened tariffs against the president of Mexico to make sure that he got the cooperation of Mexico. And you can see the dramatic results. In 12 months, President Trump went from his high of about 4,500 people per day, again, all sparked because of DACA, but 4,500 people a day to less than 600 a day. In addition to that, and here's the updated chart now. Let's take this. Yep. In addition, President Trump, because of COVID, initiated returns under Title 42. And one of the reasons I've modified the chart here is because I've seen how Democrats have been claiming that President Biden now has got numbers down to where it was under Trump. Well, it's true the encounters are down about the same level. By the way, the reason the encounters went up from a low point of April 2020 is on the presidential campaign trail, every Democrat candidate for president said they were going to end deportations, offer free health care. And so you saw single adults starting to creep back into this country because they thought it was going to be an open border, which they thought right. But because President Trump instituted Title 42, you can see the very small number. It's that little gap there of people being let in the border. As a matter of fact, it was so low in December 2020, even though it went from 17,000 in the month of April to 74,000 December, only 580 people were released that month under parole, 0.8%, 19 people a day. So, again, Trump had the border under control, and then President Biden used the exact same executive authority that President Trump used to close the border, to open it up, even though he denied it for 3.5 years until the media started reporting on this crisis of the border because Mayor Adams and Mayor Johnson started saying it was going to destroy their country, destroy their cities. The media could no longer ignore it. So all of a sudden now President Biden was forced to acknowledge this problem. He kept saying, well, Congress has to do something. Well, obviously Congress hasn't, because under political pressure, he started using that same executive authority, and he's brought the numbers down a little bit, but he's releasing, we don't know exactly how many, about 80%. In addition to that, what I've also added to this chart is he's also legalized pathways. Under the CBP One app, he's released 800 and, I'm trying to find it. Well, I don't know where it went in my numbers here, but under the CBP One app, I think it's 800-some thousand. Under the CHNV, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, it's about 500,000. It's 30,000 a month for 18 months. So that's just the new legalized way. So they can claim like, oh, this isn't illegal immigration. They've just legalized a separate pathway. That's, by the way, that's what Vice President's candidate J.D. Vance was talking about when he was fact-checked by the debate moderators. So anyway, this is a huge problem. The open border, it is facilitating a multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet. And let's face it, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking. Again, you're going to hear about the rapes and the murders and the vehicular homicides. But we've also for sure got terrorists entering this country. Are they just as sleeper cells? You know, what is it with tens of thousands of military-aged Chinese men, transnational criminal organizations, again, the drug traffickers? I mean, if you go to Central America and you talk to law enforcement there who are under the sway of the drug cartels, your new police officer there, you're going to be bribed, but you're also going to get a little DVD that shows your children and your wife going to church or going to school. So you can either accept the bribe and do the cartel's bidding and leave them alone, or they're going to threaten your family. If you're a taxi driver, the extortion, the kidnappings, if you're a taxi driver, you either pay the extortion or they put a bullet in your head and they light your car on fire. So the fact that now we're seeing Venezuela gangs taking over apartment buildings, and by the way, it's unbelievable that a CBS, I think CBS commentator on Sunday morning would talk about only a few, just a handful of apartment buildings being taken over by Venezuelan gangs. Like, that's acceptable. But that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of these gangs, these cartels infiltrating smaller communities, intimidating police officers, probably, not many, but probably bribing some under threat of killing their children or themselves. You can see where this is going. The gang activity, by the way, those unaccompanied children, when I was chairman, 70% were over the age of 15 and male. Perfect age for gang members, right? So again, this is an unmitigated disaster. We have only seen the tip of the iceberg of the mayhem, of the depredations that we're going to see long term. We're going to be dealing with this for years and decades. My suggestion is we do turn the page on this, and we actually elect a president who's serious about using that executive authority to secure the border. And by the way, we're happy to strengthen that authority. Weakened somewhat by the Flores settlement reinterpretation. We're happy to strengthen that. We just don't have partners on the other side that are willing to do it. But again, I truly appreciate you holding this field hearing, and definitely looking forward to hearing the other witnesses. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator Johnson. I suspect there'll be a few questions. I want to ask a couple to kick this off. So you go to the very right side of that chart there, and you see some of those numbers that are dropping, and you alluded to that. Could this be tied at all? We're hearing reporting now that there are tens of thousands of people staging in southern Mexico that are some beginning their movement to the northern border of Mexico as with us getting towards Election Day, we suspect. Are you familiar with the reporting that's out there that there are tens of thousands of people that are staging down in southern Mexico?
Well, I know you've done good work going down the Darien Gap and seeing the camps, of Chinese military-aged men. I don't know the exactly what's happening, and that's part of the problem is we don't have a transparent government. I mean, DHS, these numbers we're using are as good estimates as we can have. We've 12 million people coming in this country illegally, 10 million, 5.7 released. I mean, nobody really knows. 2 million gotaways. So exactly what's happening, I wish we had a administration that was transparent and honest with the American public, but we don't have that, and we certainly don't have a news media that is inquisitive and doing investigative reporting as well.
The other question I have is, we're hearing from some that what was referred to as the Lankford bill was an answer to securing the border. Obviously, we passed H.R. 2 through the House of Representatives, came out of this committee, and which bill would have been better at securing the border?
The House bill by far, and I appreciate you asking me about that because there have been so many lies told about what happened there. That bill tanked itself. For whatever reason, Leader McConnell decided to do secret negotiations, utilizing James Lankford as the negotiator. Would not be forthright in terms of what they're negotiating with the conference. I finally requested a conference meeting to finally get the information. What are you negotiating? That was a week before they introduced the bill. Our jaws dropped when we heard about the threshold, the 4,000 a day threshold to give the president discretion to stop processing asylum claims, and the 5,000 threshold would make it mandatory for him to start doing that. That got leaked over that week. When they finally introduced that bill by Sunday, that bill was dead on arrival. I don't know of any Republican senator that President Trump called up to tell him to vote against that bill, because on Monday morning, Mitch McConnell came in and said he's going to advise, even though this is the bill he negotiated, probably got Border Patrol to sponsor because they were looking for any port in a storm. But that Monday, following the introduction thing on Sunday, McConnell comes into a conference meeting and said, well, politics have changed. We got a presidential candidate. I'm going to recommend voting for cloture, voting no on cloture. Again, kind of surprised all of us because that was his negotiated bill. He knew it had no chance. It was such an awful bill. And again, it established those thresholds, basically codified an awful lot of, half of President Biden's open border policy. By the way, during the Biden administration, the average encounters is over 7,700 a day. You tack on gotaways, it's over 9,000 people a day coming in this country or attempting to come in. 9,000 people a day. Obama called it 2,000 a day, a humanitarian crisis. So that would have codified 4,000 to 5,000 a day. Plus, by Congress saying that the president doesn't have discretion to stop processing asylum claims until he reaches 4,000, you would have weakened what authority the president already had. So on both fronts, codifying what President Biden has done to this country, this clear and present danger, and weakening presidential authority, that bill was a disaster. It was dead on arrival. And quite honestly, President Trump, I know he spoke out against it, but he had nothing to do with taking that bill from my standpoint.
Yeah, that was my question. Senator Johnson, did President Trump expressing displeasure with the bill make up your mind as far as whether you were to support or oppose?
None whatsoever, and I don't think however many of us voted against it, there are only a couple that did. I don't think that had any influence whatsoever. Listen, President Trump was absolutely right coming out against the bill. We were already against it.
Members, do you have any questions? Representative Gates?
Thank you for that excellent presentation and for your expertise in this matter, Senator Johnson. I only take exception with one part, when you describe the law enforcement dilemma in Central America, to take the bribe or endure the threat. And I'm grateful that in El Salvador, there's been a third way. Through strong leadership in the state of exception, President Bukele has actually created security there, where now, if you're a Salvadorian killer, it's a more permissive environment in the United States of America than it is in El Salvador. And we see President Molino in Panama endeavoring upon an improvement there as well. But I want to get to what's going on with some of your constituents. What is happening in Whitewater, Wisconsin?
Well, you're going to hear an awful lot of testimony, so I'll let them testify. But it's a small community, about 1,000 migrants. All of a sudden showed up, and law enforcement is being overwhelmed by it. Their schools are being overwhelmed by it. And Congressman Stiles and I went there a number of months ago to hear the tale of woe, and it is. But again, that's just one little community. This is being replicated across the country in large cities and small communities where we primarily recognize the harm of the open borders more in drug trafficking, though. We don't have a huge migrant population from what I can discern traveling around talking to local law enforcement. Whitewater is somewhat of an outlier from that standpoint, but we used to have meth labs. not that many years ago, that was a big problem for law enforcement. We don't have meth labs anymore because you can get meth a lot cheaper and of higher quality coming across the southwest border now. But we used to have a central drug trafficking hub in Chicago. Now we have multiple hubs in Wisconsin. So, I mean, you're going to hear, again, the tragic story from the Rockwells in terms of the loss of their son from, again, thought it was a pain pill, and it was fentanyl laced, and died by himself in his room. It's just tragic.
Yeah, what I observed was that even in circumstances where local law enforcement was able to seize substantial cartel funds, they couldn't interest ICE in cooperation to go after the cartels that were establishing a presence in your state. There's been a lot of question and discussion about how to effectuate the largest deportation in American history, which is needed. Wouldn't some of those experiences that you've observed as a senator in Wisconsin kind of provide a pathway to do that, where when folks are doing the right thing from an investigative standpoint, and a community didn't choose to be a sanctuary city? Like, there's this theory that, well, the only places being overrun are the places that have chosen this sanctuary status. But I think in your state, you've observed that it's more broad.
No, and again, I think the Biden administration has pretty well dismantled the ability of ICE to really detain and cooperate effectively with local law enforcement. Again, that's going to require a new president. That's going to require new leadership at ICE within DHS that actually want to enforce the law. And by the way, the law enforcement officers within ICE, within CBP, they will welcome that. I mean, they want to enforce the law. They want to protect U.S. citizens. They are really beside themselves. That's part of the problem. We are seeing a high level of retirements. We can't we can't recruit law enforcement, whether it's local law enforcement after the defund law enforcement movement, but certainly CBP and ICE. I mean, it's just so dispiriting to sign up to protect the public and then basically be prevented from doing your job by this administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Members, Representative McClintock.
Well, thank you. Senator Johnson, first of all, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. You've been sounding the alarm on this crisis since the day it began. You mentioned the Flores settlement and the dangers that confront these hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors. H.R. 2, which passed the House last year, would have fixed the Flores settlement. It would have required the safe return of unaccompanied children back to their own homes and their own families. Why hasn't the Senate taken that bill up?
Because the Senate is right now under the majority rule of Democrats. And the last thing they want to do is fix this problem. Again, people need to understand, Democrats, Biden, Harris, they want an open border. They caused this problem. And by the way, I do appreciate you bringing back up the UACs and trying to be somewhat succinct. I completely left out some of the field hearings we've had with Senator Grassley with the HHS whistleblowers. You know, the New York Times article, 85,000 UACs turned over to HHS, completely unaccounted for, and that's a low number. I mean, we had a HHS whistleblower that said, again, this was a detailee into HHS. They were trying to handle this, and they were so frustrated in terms of the sponsors that they couldn't find or that seemed completely unqualified. I mean, sponsors with the addresses of storage units or a sponsor sponsoring thousands of children. And she went to her supervisor, and the supervisor said, I think you need to understand we only get sued if we keep kids in our care too long. We don't get sued by traffickers. Are you clear? We don't get sued by traffickers. So the fact of the matter is, HHS is taking they've got to get rid of them within 20 days, and they are turning them over to sponsors that they know are operated by transnational criminal organizations that are sex trafficking, human trafficking, and they know that's going to happen, and they're doing it, and they're turning a blind eye toward it. And of course, the media, except for the New York Times, I give them credit, a blind eye toward it as well.
This is completely incomprehensible to me. If a little waif showed up on your doorstep, the first thing you're going to do is get that little child back to its family and its home. You're not going to take that child 3 doors down to a crack house and drop them off there. And yet that is exactly what our government is doing, is it not?
Yes, and it's shameful.
When we abandoned Afghanistan, we released 5,000 most dangerous terrorists on the planet that were being held at Parowan Detention Facility. We know where one of those terrorists went. 10 days later, they went to the Abbey Gate at Kabul airport and detonated a bomb that killed 13 U.S. service members. We don't know where the other 5,000 are, do we?
Not to my knowledge, and what's even more egregious about that is they didn't have identification, and we just created identities for these people.
Is it conceivable that some of those 5,000 terrorists are among the 1.9 million known gotaways that we watched cross the border but couldn't intercept because the Border Patrol was completely overwhelmed taking names and changing diapers at the border?
Yeah, it's almost certainly that's the case. And understand, we've apprehended, we've encountered people on the terrorist watch list. Those are the ones we've apprehended. The real bad people, I'm sure, take advantage of these surges of thousands of people at one border crossing, so you have nobody on the line, and they're going to be part of that known and unknown gotaway population. There's just no doubt that there are terrorists we've led in this country, members of transnational criminal organizations. It's just a ticking time bomb.
When we were at the Yuma border a year ago, we talked to a group of rank-and-file Border Patrol agents, and one thing I said is, look, we're the Congress. We can't enforce the laws. We write laws. So what laws do you need us to write? And unanimously they responded, we don't need new laws. We need to enforce the laws that we have. The chief of the Border Patrol told us at Eagle Pass that he says, I'm standing in front of an open fire hydrant with a bucket. I don't need more buckets. I need somebody to shut off the fire hydrant. Is this all, President Trump proved that using existing law, he could secure the border. The laws didn't change on January 20th, 2021. The presidency changed. So is that ultimately in the hands of the American people, whether we're going to secure our border or not?
Again, the Supreme Court ruled the president the current law exudes deference to the president. So he's got enormous power. Trump used it to secure the border. Biden used it to open it up. I would say that it would be nice to address the Flores settlement reinterpretation. I mean, Secretary Jay Johnson completely disagreed with that. It makes no sense. You can't detain a child with their family. That makes no sense. That could be fixed. We absolutely have to increase the credible fear standard. The standard ought to be, do you have a valid asylum claim or not?
HR 2 does.
It ought to be just that simple.
HR 2 does that too.
There are things that we could certainly strengthen, and we'd be happy to do that. But that's not what Democrats want to do. They basically want to codify this open border.
And as you pointed out, the Langford bill would have made it impossible, would have forbidden a president to take the actions that Trump did until illegal border crossings reached 4,000. At least 4,000 a day.
Yeah. Now, again, that's incomprehensible. You mentioned the border in Texas. I remember going down, I think this is before I became chairman, 2014, during the Obama's humanitarian crisis. And we were all singing the praises of CBP, who created this facility in McAllen, Texas. Because again, you have all these family units. You're really not sure. They weren't sure. Is this really the father? And so they separated within that unit in a very humane way. They had chain link fences and stuff. And we were all celebrating that. We were saying, singing the praises of CBP for kind of going outside normal government rules and responding to this crisis. Of course, a year or two later, under President Trump, that exact same facility with the exact same chain link fences all of a sudden was kids in cages. Again, a grotesque double standard.
Representative Fitzgerald?
Good, thank you.
Representative Van Orden? Okay, Representative Grothman, you are recognized.
Just a general, I kind of want your opinion. I really appreciate the graphs you have up here. And obviously, as you just mentioned, the unaccompanied minors coming here is, 8,000-9,000 a month. Why do you believe you have a situation that these minors are separated from their parents, probably never going to see their parents again, and we had a short period of time in which kids were separated from their parents under the Trump administration. Now we have wildly more minors all alone up here. Why does the press not consider this a scandal, and why does the average American not know about it?
Because the press, like our Democrat colleagues, they are supportive of an open border.
So that's why the American public does not know all the unaccompanied minors we have streaming across our border.
Yeah, and again, The media, I quit calling them mainstream media, the legacy of the corporate media, I mean, they're cheerleaders for the Democrat Party. They are the Commerce Department for the Democrats. They wanted Biden president, so they did everything they could to get somebody who campaigned from his basement elected president. That they were certainly cheerleading when Biden was replaced on the ticket with Kamala Harris. They put her on a pedestal, declared her the second coming. They're trying to do everything they can to get her elected as well. So again, they are absolutely supportive of all these radical left policies, and one of those radical left policies is literally the clear and present danger of a wide open border.
Thank you.
Members, anyone with a question?
Yes, sir.
Representative Van Orden, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank Representatives Moore and Pocan for showing up here at this incredibly important hearing as immigration goes in between the top 1 and 2 issues for all Wisconsinites and American citizens. Our folks are literally being kidnapped, raped, and murdered here in the state of Wisconsin, around the country, and we have 2 members of Congress who couldn't bother showing up today. I think that speaks volumes. The criminal illegal alien that Congressman Tiffany referred to earlier made his way across the border with Venezuelan gang tattoos, and those are not a live to ride, ride to live tattoo. It's either you're a member of that gang, you have that tattoo, or they will cut it off you while you're living. So that should have been taken for what it is at the border. This person never should have been allowed in the country. Made his way to Minneapolis, arrested for crimes after the Dane County Sheriff had warrants out for strangulation and some other violent crimes. Didn't bother following up with it because both those places are sanctuary cities. Then he came to a place a half mile away from where 4 of my grandchildren live and brutally raped a mother and assaulted a daughter over a period of days. And this could have been stopped at any point during this chain. And solely because the Biden administration is pushing this incredibly horrible political agenda, is that going to keep happening over and over and over again? So Senator Johnson, I just found this out this last week, and I wanted to know if you're tracking this. We went to the federal prison in Oxford. It's in my district. And half of the prisoners in this federal prison, half are illegal aliens. Are you tracking the volume of what's taking place with it? I mean, this is the second, third order effect of opening up these borders, but when half of an institution is occupied by illegal aliens, that's something that I'm hoping we're going to be looking at here under a Trump presidency. But
Yeah.
Are you tracking this, sir?
I'm not, but it's not surprising. It's not just going to be federal prisons. It's going to be local prisons, and they're going to be bearing the brunt of the cost of this. I mean, I think a House committee said that the cost of dealing with this crisis is about $150 billion per year across all governmental units. That's a massive cost imposed on us by the Biden and Harris administration. And you said, that gang member never should have been led in this country. The vast majority of these people, as sympathetic as I am with people who want to come here for opportunity, they don't qualify for asylum. Asylum is a very tough standard. You had to be persecuted by your government or threatened with persecution under some very limited, and I can't remember all of them, but race, gender, part of a club, some kind of social group or political group. Again, it's a very tough standard. Most people come to this country, other than the criminals, are economic migrants. And again, we might welcome them in a legal system, which is one of the travesties, by the way, of this open border. It is set back establishing a functioning legal immigration that is controlled, that brings people in to improve our economy. I'm for a robust legal immigration system, and we need one. We certainly need one here in Wisconsin. Certainly in your district with all the farmers. I mean, we need workers. We need laborers. And, immigrant laborers do a great job. They come in here, they work their tail off. But it has to be a legal system, and you cannot establish that until you secure the border. And so Biden has set back establishing that legal system, I don't know how many years. So it's a travesty.
It is. And just for a couple stats, at one point they had 17 to 20 some thousand rotating through Afghan refugees at Fort McCoy, which I represent. We went back and looked at every single Afghan that came here that was eligible for a special immigrant visa. I mean, they worked with the United States government during the war. Guess how many of those people qualify for SIVs?
Probably not many.
Zero. The
it's
answer
not
is
many.
zero, Senator.
I was right.
That is less than not many. And the last thing is we're looking at about, 250,000 missing children, correct? The Biden administration has lost.
Yeah, that's what the whistleblowers are talking about in our hearings, yeah. I mean, 85,000, that's what I said, that's a low number.
Yeah, let's make sure that that's in the record, that the Biden administration under the Harris border czardom is solely responsible for losing almost 250,000 children in the United States that are most likely being trafficked.
And
as
again,
we speak.
knowing full well that they were releasing them into the hands of probably members of transnational criminal organizations, human sex traffickers, knowing full well that again, it wasn't a surprise to them.
Yeah. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Stile.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Johnson, thank you for being here with us today. Thanks for coming to Whitewater as we discuss the issue. We're going to get into that in the second panel. I just want to come back to your chart here. Both of us come with, if we can keep the chart up, if you would. Can we keep that same chart? That chart has everything except, I think, one thing. What would that chart look like during the Biden-Harris administration if you added gotaways?
But a couple million more people.
I think as we're
Because
stage setting here.
These are encounters, so yeah, I mean.
No, I'm supportive of the chart.
I would have a different scale.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do in the stage setting of this, because we're going to get into a great next panel. This only captures part of the problem. It's a huge problem. This captures part of the problem. In addition to that, you have millions of gotaways. And if we just think intuitively, some individuals, as you've noted, turn themselves in to abuse our parole system, to abuse the catch and release policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Other individuals aren't interested in turning themselves in and allowing the abused system of the Biden-Harris administration to give them paperwork to be released into the United States. And if we think intuitively, who might those individuals be that don't want to be caught in the first place?
Yeah, those would be the bad hombres, I guess. But you talked about abuse. I mentioned when it came to UACs and DACA, that was an abuse of prosecutorial discretion. What this administration has done with parole, it's a strange term. You know, what parole means for immigration is you're allowed in the country for a special purpose, you know, like to get a medical treatment, or you've got a family member that died and you're coming in very short term for that medical treatment or to attend that funeral. They've granted that to well over a million people. Again, it's supposed to be case-by-case basis, and they've just expanded this. So again, it's a lawless, like the Obama administration, these are lawless administrations, and they're afraid for our democracy, that they're the danger to our democracy.
I totally agree. I think when we also think about the gotaways, when we think about those individuals who are crossing, who have a criminal background, who've previously been deported, who may be trafficking drugs, those are the individuals likely to try to avoid the encounter that are coming into the United States in large numbers. And then when we think about the policies of sanctuary cities, and we know Dane County operates as a sanctuary city because ICE makes it clear that Dane County does not coordinate with them, we know the danger that poses into our communities. Was pointed out by Congressman Van Orden, the impact that that's having in our state. And there was been state legislation where we could have had an opportunity to ban sanctuary cities here in the United States, and we've not been successful in doing that under Democratic leadership in this state.
By the way, you know, something you all know, the border with Mexico is 100% secure on the Mexican side. I mean, you do not cross that until you pay the trafficking fee. Okay, so the cartels, they will funnel, you know, hundreds, thousands of people into one area, so they can, you know, probably the higher value, they'll probably get a higher trafficking fee for, you know, trafficking the bad hombres as known or unknown gotaways.
I appreciate your testimony. I look forward to the second panel. Mr.
Thank
Chairman,
you.
I yield back.
And I'll recognize Representative Bentz for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, thank you so much for being here. When I first saw your chart, I thought it was something showing us inflation. That's what I thought that was. But here's the point. The point is, the Biden administration suggests that now that inflation has eased off a bit, all the consequences somehow evaporated, and they did not.
Right.
And that's the same is true for your chart on immigration, isn't it? Oh, it's way down, but what about all those 7, 8, 9 million people that now are here? And so there seems to be, we had the head of Homeland Security, former head of Homeland Security in front of us the other day, and he was talking about how there might be some means of removing people from the United States, but then he admitted it would be extraordinarily expensive and extremely difficult. So the challenge isn't it? And that's what I'm looking forward to the second panel, of how in the world do we now deal with these folks that are here and probably never going to leave? That to me is where our discussion is going to go. We can talk about who caused this, the Biden administration, your chart shows. Now what? And so that's my question to you. Now what?
Well, for those of you who've been to the border, you also probably saw what I saw, is so many young pregnant women, I mean, in their 8th or 9th month. Of course, they come here, and that child's a U.S. citizen, which personally I believe we ought to do away with birthright citizenship. We're in the minority of countries that grant that, and that's just another magnet to come here. I hope under a serious administration, deporting criminals will be reasonably easy, but past that point, it's going to be very difficult. Because of birthright citizenship, are you going to really separate a child from an infant from their mother and father? So no, this is something we're going to have to grapple with, I hope, as Republicans. We do it with a great deal of humanity. Take a look at how people, again, they were welcomed in. And, yes, they came in illegally, but they were welcomed in by the Biden administration. So I think we have to factor that in and figure out in some way, shape, or form, how do we deal with these people with humanity, the ones who have behaved, that are working, they're not a burden on society. That's something we're going to have to grapple with. That would be a very serious issue, and I hope it doesn't break down on party lines. I hope this is something we can work with on a bipartisan basis, but we've got a real problem on our hands.
We do. The $150 billion a year into the indefinite future of cost, and 1 in 10 being entitled to asylum. At least that's what our hearing record shows. 1 in 10.
Right.
The other 9, they shouldn't have come across, even though, as you say, they indeed were welcomed in by the Biden administration. Well, thank you, Senator, so much for being here today.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, Senator Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We are now going to move on to our, by the way, thank you for creating that chart and saving a person's life. We're now going to move on to our second panel, and as it is set up, I'm going to do the introductions of the people that are going to be on this next panel. First of all, we have the Honorable Eric Toney. He's in his 12th year as District Attorney for Fond du Lac County and is the former President of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, currently serving as past president. Prior to being elected district attorney, he was in private practice, focused on mental health, juvenile, criminal defense, and bankruptcy law. District Attorney Toney manages an office that files thousands of criminal cases each year and has personally prosecuted hundreds, if not thousands of those cases, including cold case homicide, sexual assault, drug conspiracies, gang crime, domestic violence, drunk driving, violent crime, racketeering, human trafficking, and election fraud. Jacob Curtis is the General Counsel and Director of the Center of the Investigative Oversight at the Institute for Reforming Government. He was appointed by Governor Walker to serve as Chief Legal Counsel at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. He also previously served as Deputy Legal Counsel at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, was a policy advisor to a state senator, and served as an elected county supervisor. Mr. Curtis also serves in the Wisconsin Air National Guard. Rick Rockwall is the co-founder and vice president of the board of the Love Logan Foundation. Mr. Rockwall and his wife Erin founded the organization in August of 2022 following the fentanyl poisoning of their 19-year-old son Logan. The foundation educates and informs communities around the country about the impact of fentanyl and how education and awareness can save lives. Rick is also a lead engineer for the Eaton Corporation located in Waukesha, Wisconsin. We want to thank Erin for having appeared a year and a half ago before our committee to testify, and we appreciate Rick is here today. Henry Kinson was born and raised in Whitewater, Wisconsin, grew up attending Whitewater Public Schools, served on the Whitewater School Board for 7 years, and has 4 sons, all of whom have attended Whitewater Public Schools. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Master of Business Administration. He is a certified public accountant and a certified information security auditor. Sheriff Dale Schmidt has served in the Dodge County Sheriff's Office since 2004, first as a patrol deputy, then as sergeant, finally taking over as sheriff in 2015. Prior to 2004, he served as a police officer in multiple Wisconsin jurisdictions, including the village of Wekani and Horicon. He also currently serves as the president of the Badger State Sheriff's Association. Sheriff Schmidt holds an associate's degree in police science from Fox Valley Technical College and is a nationally certified drug recognition expert and a standardized field sobriety test master instructor. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. And we're going to begin by swearing all of you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? I noticed that each of the witnesses proclaimed in the affirmative. You may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. We're going to have Sheriff Schmidt go first with his testimony. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Tiffany, Mr. Chair, members of the thank you, members of the committee, for having me here today. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak, not only as the Dodge County Sheriff, but on behalf of many of the sheriffs. I understand I am the president of the Sheriff's Association. Some of the things.
Could you pause for just a second?
Sure.
I would ask the other members on the panel, please silence your mic, and you'll see with the light, it might eliminate some feedback. We'll see what happens.
Certainly.
Sheriff Schmidt can continue.
Thank you. I represent many opinions of the sheriffs of the Sheriff's Association, not all, so I'm not speaking as the president here today, but I do have a number of incidents that I would like to share with everybody. As you know, being the sheriff is a very tasking job. There's a lot of work that I have to do. This morning I was out looking for a young lady who was missing. Found her, thankfully. Right now I am supposed to be back where I have 17 individuals doing a search warrant and a homicide investigation. There's a lot of things that we have to do. I thank you for taking your time to be here in your home state or come from across the country to be here. I do note, along with Mr. Van Orden, what he indicated earlier, I'm disappointed that we don't have individuals here to hear what we have to say here today. We are your constituents, and we have concerns, and I thank you for hearing them. I hope you can take them back to the other side and share them, but it's very important stuff for you to hear, and I really thank Senator Johnson for being here, but where's Senator Baldwin and other members of the other side? That's very concerning to me as a constituent. I elect you to be here just as Congressman Fitzgerald elects me to be his sheriff. I have a responsibility to him. You have a responsibility to me, and I appreciate you hearing what we have to say. With that being said, some of the sheriffs that have shared some very serious things with me. If Trump doesn't win this election, we are screwed. That's a quote from one of our sheriffs. Another sheriff, people don't understand how bad it is. If you would have asked me 10 years ago when I became sheriff, if I'd be sitting here in front of you talking about a border crisis, I would have said, no way. No way. We aren't in a position where it's going to be this bad. I'm here to tell you that is not the case. You obviously know that is not the case. In my 24 years of law enforcement, I have never seen the type of criminal element from outside of our borders in our home state here of Wisconsin, our border state of Wisconsin, like we are seeing now. And it didn't take me long to reach out to our fellow sheriffs and say, hey, what have you got around the state for them to come back to me with some incidents? And there's crimes of all kinds from around the country, or around the state. I'm going to start with a couple of them in my own county that happened here recently. The first one, really, the first arrest took place under President Trump at the very end of his first term. The DEA, in collaboration with our agency, made an arrest of an individual from the Sinaloa drug cartel, in which they seized 81 pounds of methamphetamine. 81 pounds, that's a small human. 5.5 ounces of fentanyl. 5.5 ounces of fentanyl will kill 156,000 people. From one person, from a cartel member that lives in the city of Juneau. 3,000 people, my county seat. I'm here to tell you we have cartel members in every single one of the counties in Dodge County. I'm sorry, in the state of Wisconsin. It is happening. And we thought, okay, the DEA is here. The federal government is here to save us on this one. No prosecution. He was arrested, no prosecution. They were going to work him. To this day, I don't know that this individual has ever been prosecuted for any of those offenses. In November of 2022, our drug task force came to me and said, hey, we've got this guy again. I said, what do you mean we got this guy again? I thought, isn't this guy in prison? No, we've got this guy again. They had some controlled buys into him, made an additional arrest. and ended up with 4 pounds of methamphetamine, another 4 pounds, 2.1 pounds of marijuana, and $51,000 in suspected drug money, which was all seized. My people did the right thing. I don't know what happened after at transition of power to the Biden administration, because under Trump's administration, they were doing a good thing, and then all of a sudden it just fell off the table and nothing happened. 2 years later, into the Biden-Harris administration, we have to come back and arrest this guy, and we have possession with intent to deliver more than 50 grams of meth, possession with intent to deliver marijuana, 200 grams to 1,000 grams, maintaining a drug trafficking place, possession of drug paraphernalia, 3 counts of manufacturing and delivery of methamphetamine. Blows me away. We have him in prison now. The state is now paying for him to be in prison. He shouldn't have been here in the first place, and the state is going to pay for him to be in prison for 18 and a half years and then have him on supervised release for 10 years. When he shouldn't be here in the first place, or should be in federal prison. That is a problem. That is a problem that's now on the Wisconsin taxpayers to take care of him. Another comment that was made earlier about law enforcement in other countries, we don't have them taking a hold on our state here in Wisconsin yet. It's coming. We will have more cartel members coming into the state of Wisconsin. We will have more instances of individuals threatening our families. It's going to happen, just like it happens in Mexico, if this continues, if we don't stop this. I'm fearful for my family. I'm fearful for the family of those that serve with me, that when we have cartel members in it, we're going to arrest individuals, that they're going to turn around and say, they're going to hand us that DVD and say, what are you going to do if we don't do something soon? Other incidents. We had a scammer from India. Tried to scam somebody out of $81,000 in Dodge County just last month. We were able to get in, intercept, and take this person into custody in the midst of the deal. We don't always get to do that. This was really cool. We got him in custody. He is now in our court system, and we are hopefully working on some kind of deportation process, but we got a $500,000 cash bond. We'll take care of it here at the state because the federal government isn't doing it. But I sure wish the federal government would. Fond du Lac County incident. Individual on March 22nd of 2024, the individual was stabbed. An illegal alien left the victim for dead. Just left her for dead. Fond du Lac County, in collaboration with 2 other counties, was able to take this individual into custody on multiple charges: first-degree intentional homicide, mayhem, first-degree reckless injury, aggravated battery. Those are all pending. Another Fond du Lac County, just over the county border. 12-year-old female had just shown up at somebody's door. She broke away from somebody who was sexually assaulting her, had her bound, had her gagged, had her blindfolded. She broke away. She had enough power to get away and get to somebody's home and seek help. And he paid for her. And he paid for her from her mother. Unbelievable stories that we're hearing right here in Wisconsin. Oconto County, an individual who was found dead laying in a park in Green Bay Shores State Wildlife Area. The Oconto County Sheriff tells me that his staff worked really hard on this, only to find out that this individual, the victim, was dealing, and this individual owed the suspect money. The suspect goes, finds him, picks him up at his home, takes him out to the park, a couple rounds, puts him down. And here we have a homicide in quiet Oconto County in northeast Wisconsin. I could go on time after time. There's all kinds of incidents. We have illegal driving, people not having licenses. We can't identify them. Incidents where we're stopping people on the side of the road, and we can't identify them. One incident on Highway 41, right in our county, 4 individuals. None of them would identify themselves to us. One of them we figured out who it was. 3 of them we took to the jail. One we find out has a U.S. Marshal Service warrant. And you know the U.S. Marshal Service warrants aren't cheap warrants. They're felony warrants. We didn't know who that was. 40-minute ride to jail before we figured out who it was. More and more of these individuals are coming into our county. Fentanyl is killing people. We have 1,500 people a year dying in Wisconsin because of fentanyl overdoses. And I would love to put up a border around Dodge County or around the state of Wisconsin, but we need the federal government to do that at our southern border. I appreciate your time. I've got so much more, but I know I'm out of time and am welcoming your questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Schmidt. And Mr. Curtis, you may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It happened fast and with little explanation or resources. In 2022, the city of Whitewater began to observe an increase in migrants from Central America. Whitewater Police Chief Daniel Meyer saw an increase in various law enforcement activity relating to issues not normally associated with local residents. He noted in an email to a Walworth County official that, quote, within the last month or so, our department has had contact with an increasing number of Nicaraguan migrants who have recently moved to our area. I don't have much of an estimate of how many people have moved into the city at this point, but a number of the adults have found jobs at larger businesses in our area. We recently have had a number of criminal investigations involving some of these individuals, and we've also had children from some of these families within the school district who have been reported truant. All told, from 2022 through 2023, the city estimates at least 1,000 migrants from Central America quietly established themselves in the sleepy college town of 15,000, a population increase of roughly 7%. The city has struggled to deal with the increasing strain on law enforcement resources, housing overcapacity, and the challenges associated with educating children with no formal background in schooling and often lacking basic English skills. These increasing burdens culminated in the police chief authoring a letter to the White House on December 28, 2023, highlighting the strain that had been placed on existing resources and describing the challenge as, quote, a critical humanitarian issue. A nearly identical letter had been sent the previous week to DHS Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. These letters resulted in additional communications from Wisconsin's congressional delegation and the Wisconsin legislature, as well as a significant number of state and national media requests. While many media outlets moved on to the next story, the city of Whitewater has continued to struggle to meet the demands from the newcomers. In order to determine the full extent of the challenges, on March 14, 2024, IRG's Center for Investigative Oversight submitted a series of public records requests to the police chief, who fully complied with the request and provided over 400 responsive records. IRG's review of the records provided by the city uncovered numerous revelations, which were detailed in a June report that is being provided to the committee. The 8 key takeaways include the following. First, while numerous public officials have attempted to highlight the challenges, the nation's broken immigration system and open borders continue to place an unmanageable burden on local units of government. Nationally touted funding programs are either unavailable or insufficient. 2, unlike sanctuary cities, it does not appear the city of Whitewater sought the immigrants. Instead, the city's theory explaining the sudden influx revolves around a complex web of ample student housing following COVID, a need for farm and manufacturing labor, and the congregation of sponsor families in and around the city that were then identified by migrants at the border. 3, despite the presence of notorious MS-13 gang members from Nicaragua and investigations that have led to the seizure of significant cartel funds, confusion remains as to the processing and potential deportation of violent criminals. Emails reflected uncertainty regarding the process for contacting ICE as migrants await immigration hearings in Chicago. This is particularly troubling considering the identification of known international crime syndicate members within the city. In December 2023, the police chief thanked ICE for, quote, the recent assistance in our city removing an individual who had been identified as a wanted MS-13 gang member from Nicaragua. A member of this committee, in a January letter to the police chief, made reference to the infiltration of Mexico's Gulf Cartel in Whitewater. And while unrelated to the situation in Whitewater, and already mentioned by Congressman Van Orton, it was recently reported that a woman was sexually assaulted in Prairie du Chien by a suspected member of Tren de Aragua, the violent criminal organization born a decade ago in Venezuelan prisons. Simply put, while the exact scope and extent of these criminal operations in Wisconsin is not clear, their very existence in the state should motivate every policymaker to secure the nation's borders. 4, at various points, city leadership sought assistance from the state, including the governor's office. While meetings took place, there was an emphasis on the private nature of the meeting and a request to keep the meeting, quote, low profile to avoid the press. 5, city officials were made aware of deplorable living conditions, including children sleeping in sheds during sub-zero temperatures, children left at home unattended while parents worked, a 14-year-old being forced to work 30 hours per week by her father, and small apartment units where children were forced to cohabitate with 8 to 10 adults. The pairing of non-family members has resulted in allegations of sexual assault involving young females and other acts against victims, including the discovery of a deceased child discarded in a ditch in a bag. At the time of the IRG report, there were 10 open sexual offense cases involving migrants in the city. 6, as a result of increased costs to the city's police department and school district, both taxing entities are considering property tax referendums possibly as soon as spring of 2025. 7, because of the focus on the unique law enforcement challenges associated with the migrant population, such as violations for driving without a license, the police department has identified a significant decrease in proactive policing. And finally, in light of questions related to the legal status of migrants, questions have been raised regarding how individuals should be identified. In particular, the city appears unsure how migrants can obtain identification cards. Some members of the community have suggested paths for migrants to obtain driver's licenses. Despite this lack of clarity, at least one record suggests certain migrants have been able to obtain temporary driver's licenses from the Wisconsin DMV. In conclusion, while numerous public officials have attempted to highlight the challenges, the nation's broken immigration system continues to place an unmanageable burden on local units of government. Overall, many of the communications, particularly those from the police chief, make clear the city has attempted to balance maintaining an objective posture on a highly charged public policy debate while recognizing the clear impact the influx of immigrants is having on the city's ability to protect its residents, ensure a quality public education for the city's school children, and maintain fiscal solvency. Unless and until the federal government secures the border and repairs the nation's utterly broken immigration infrastructure, local units of government like those in Whitewater, Wisconsin, will be left to respond to the federal government's continued failures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Mr. Rockwall, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman, members of Congress, and members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Rick Rockwell. I'm a husband. My wife, Erin, is here with me today, father of 2 boys, Caden and Logan, and co-founder of the Love Logan Foundation. Today, I share the heart-wrenching story of my son, Logan, and the devastating impact that fentanyl has had on our family. On Valentine's Day in 2021, my family's life changed forever. Nothing could have prepared us for the heartbreaking pain from the loss of a son and a brother. Logan, at just 19 years old, died alone in his dorm room at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He took what he thought was a 30-milligram oxycodone, but tragically, it was a counterfeit pill containing a lethal dose of fentanyl. I will never get the image out of my head of our family walking into his dorm room and seeing his lifeless body on his bed. There was a stuffed animal next to him. He was just a child. If there's anything as painful as the loss of a child, I cannot begin to imagine what that might be. Our hopes and dreams for Logan and our family were shattered, and we now live with the what-ifs and the what could have been. We made it a priority to make our boys feel special, whether it was a birthday party, camping trip, family trip across the country, or cheering them on when they played their favorite sport, baseball. We were their biggest fans. Faith was also important to us, and attending church together was a priority. And Logan was full of life. He had an infectious smile and was very passionate about things like our cats, music, reading, and drawing. Logan was very kind-hearted and often helped others who were struggling. Logan also had his share of struggles with anxiety, being bullied at school, and later depression. We sought out help for Logan at an early age, and despite our best efforts, Logan fell victim to fentanyl. Logan was a bright and wonderful young man who deserved a future. We will always remember his smile, his spirit, and the love that he brought into this world. As mentioned, the pill Logan took was laced with fentanyl, a substance so potent and addictive that as little as 2 milligrams, equivalent to just a few grains of salt, can be lethal. Fentanyl is the #1 killer in our country for ages 18 to 45 and has contributed to approximately 150,000 deaths between the years 2022 and 2023. This is over 200 deaths per day. Where is the urgent response from our elected officials? In 2022, we lost an average of 22 teenagers per week from drug overdoses and poisonings, primarily driven by fentanyl. That is like losing 1 classroom each week for an entire year. Again, where is the response? Fentanyl overdoses and poisonings in Wisconsin from 2019 to 2021, the year Logan died, increased by almost 100%. Fentanyl does not discriminate by race, gender, or financial status. Every parent and person in this room or any other room in America is at risk of being impacted by this epidemic. You are likely to hear these tragic experiences shared from a parent's perspective like mine, but let us not forget the often overlooked impact this is having on those who have lost siblings. They have an entire lifetime with that brother or sister taken from them. Families are being torn apart. There is also a battle against stigma associated with these deaths, which I know hinders efforts to combat this poison. These are sons, daughters, grandchildren, brothers, and sisters we are losing. They deserve a chance to recover, or like Logan, deserved a chance to learn from their mistakes. With fentanyl, they die before they even get a chance. This epidemic deserves more attention and a response as strong, bold, and determined as other issues have received in recent years. We secure our homes by locking doors and regulating who enters. Our government under the current administration is failing to do the same for our country. Record numbers of unvetted migrants are entering the United States, overwhelming resources and allowing fentanyl to pour in. Mexican cartels are operating just south of our border, and they are the main organizations manufacturing and distributing illicit fentanyl. These cartels, driven by greed, have no regard for the lives lost from the poison they are pawning. These criminal organizations are in our own backyard, and yet our borders remain wide open. Increasing awareness and education about this crisis is crucial. This responsibility has largely fallen on the families of victims like mine, who have taken up the cause through advocacy and nonprofits. In 2022, my wife Erin and I founded the Love Logan Foundation to raise awareness and support other families impacted by fentanyl. We want to end these tragedies like the young man who died just 9 months after Logan in the same dorm building from the same type of pill. Again, the same school, same dorm, 9 months later. Where was the awareness? Our government must also step up to educate and raise awareness to protect families from fentanyl. As I mentioned earlier, fentanyl is the #1 cause of death in our country for ages 18 to 45, with over 200 lives lost each day. Given those numbers and the drastic increases in fentanyl-related deaths at even younger ages, there is an urgent need for comprehensive strategies to combat this crisis. Our families deserve better, and that starts with better border policies and a commitment from our leaders to prioritize the fight against fentanyl. We cannot continue to lose our children to this preventable tragedy. Erin and I learned the hard way that there is no level of involvement, number of vacations, Sunday school lessons, amount of money, or parental love that can eliminate the threat of fentanyl from our families. We need our leaders, the guardians of our nation, to honor their oath of office by protecting our country and keeping our families safe. I lost my son Logan, a wonderful human being who deserved to learn from that tragic mistake that took his life. Please remember my son and every other American who has lost their life to fentanyl poisoning. They are more than numbers and data. Each number represents a life lost, a family torn apart, and a missed opportunity for the current administration to uphold their commitment to protect Americans. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwall. Your son will not be forgotten. Mr. Kinson, you may begin.
Good morning. My name is Henry Kinson. I grew up in Whitewater, went to Whitewater School District, and then to undergrad at UW-Whitewater. I served on the Whitewater School Board for 7 years, and I'm also the parent of 4 boys who have attended Whitewater Public Schools, with one still a sophomore there. I was asked to come here to testify as to the educational situation in my hometown of Whitewater due to the large recent influx of non-English speakers. Put simply, educational outcomes by every metric are falling like a rock in Whitewater. When I attended Whitewater School years ago, as a small university town, our outcomes were great. Certainly in the top third of the state and always the best in the area. Over the last 4 years, Whitewater has had the biggest drop in academic achievement in the state for larger districts. Today, we rank in the bottom 5th of all districts across the state and are still falling. The reasons for our falling test scores are no secret. All you have to do is go to Wisconsin's Department of Public Instruction website to see that the 3 drivers of academic achievement across the state are special needs kids, economically disadvantaged kids, and English learners, otherwise referred to as ESL. That's it. The more a school district has of any of these kids, the lower the academic results will be, and vice versa, and it's true everywhere. Any district's test scores are basically a math problem. So what inputs have been changing at Whitewater? Our proportion of special needs kids, while high at about 20%, the state average is 14, has not been growing. Similarly, our proportion of economically disadvantaged kids is also high, but hovers around 50%, whereas the state average is 45, which leaves English learners. As recently as 2021, the district had 236 English learners. Last year it was 352, an increase of 50% in just 2 years, and growing. Migrant children are almost always both economically disadvantaged and ESL, and sometimes special needs as well. I just spoke with a friend who is a paraprofessional in the district whose job it is to care for special needs kids, and she told me of a family that just moved here who has 2 out of their 3 kids being high special needs, like having to have their diapers changed as kindergartners. This requires the district to transfer those kids to special facility in Elkhorn, which costs the state even more money. At Lincoln Elementary, more than a quarter of the kids are ESL. Such a large and growing proportion of kids who aren't native speakers invariably drives academic achievement down for everyone, and we are no exception. Last year, with 25% ESL kids in the school, Lincoln sent 80% of its 5th graders into middle school testing below grade level in English. This data is public, it's from Wisconsin's own DPI. To combat this, the Whitewater School District spends hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get the migrant kids up to speed. But these expenditures necessarily come at the expense of other things, such as lowering teacher to non-ESL student ratios, so overall test scores drop. Another dynamic that many people don't think about is open enrollment. Here in Wisconsin, we have public school choice. So if you don't want your kid to go to your home district, you can enroll them in another one. As Whitewater's academics have declined, the number of parents placing their kids out of the district has increased, which further depresses test scores and decreases revenue, as the most involved parents are the ones most likely to move their kids somewhere else. Hundreds of Whitewater parents do this every day, with more than 200 kids going to schools outside the Whitewater district, more than 10%. This includes our own school board president, who sends her kids to neighboring Elkhorn to attend school, where they have less than 5% English learners and much higher test scores. There's a boy who lives in the district who got a perfect ACT test result this spring, but he doesn't go to Whitewater schools. This movement of students outside the Whitewater district costs us almost $2 million a year in revenue and illustrates the negative feedback loop that can occur as a district faces a large influx of English learners like the ones we are experiencing real time. To see what we are heading for, we don't need to look any further than our neighboring district of Delavan, which began facing an influx of English learners about 30 years ago. It now has the highest proportion of resident kids in the state enrolling out, almost 40%. 40% of the parents in Delavan send their kids outside of Delavan. It has perennial problems passing referenda and low test scores that are actually worse than Whitewater's, but Whitewater is not far behind. I'm often asked what can be done to remedy the situation. At this point, I will ask anyone who will listen, please just stop the bleeding. This is a problem not of our making and out of our control. It is frustrating hearing politicians imply that the residents who care about their kids' instructional quality are somehow racists or xenophobes, as their own children attend classes at public and private schools with few to no English learners. Some of our classrooms are half English learners. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kinson. And now, finally, District Attorney Tony, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for being here in Wisconsin today. I want to just begin my comments by Rick, thanking you for sharing your story, and condolences to you and Aaron for the loss of your son, Logan, and the work that you're doing that I think is undoubtedly saving lives. And I want to talk a little bit about Fond du Lac County. We're a county of about 100,000 people. We have numerous highways running through the community that makes us a corridor for drug trafficking. We've seen the seizure of drugs, the quantities soaring like we have never seen before, as was previously noted. We're not seeing methamphetamine labs. We're seeing larger quantities of meth coming across the border and into our community, with fentanyl being the most destructive of those deaths. And we heard the Logan story on the impact that that's having. And sadly, as a district attorney, I've sat across from too many parents that have buried their child. And those conversations are never easy. When we're actually able to file a criminal case, they have to come back to court day after day, month after month, sometimes year after year, to relive that trauma. And these are all avoidable deaths if we just had control of the southern border to prevent the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. And it's not just the drug overdose deaths, but I think the numbers are staggering. In Fond du Lac County in 2019, we had 19 overdose deaths. In 2020, it was 27. 2021, it was 20. 2022, it was 23. And then last year in 2023, it was 32. And these are all families that don't get to say I love you to somebody that they hold dear, whether it be at Thanksgiving, birthdays, holidays, family events. And this is all a direct consequence of the southern border crisis with drugs pouring into our country. And the fentanyl crisis cannot be underscored enough. We need to make sure that we don't have more families that experience what Rick and Aaron experienced, and it is something that we can gain control of. We've seen the graphs and some of the efforts that have been done during Senator Johnson's presentation. And it's not just the drug overdose deaths that we're seeing, it's the attempted homicides, sexual assaults, human trafficking. With the testimony that I submitted, I included the criminal complaints from the cases that we filed, and ethical obligations have to make sure we know that those individuals are presumed innocent and lesser until proven guilty. We have 4 people charged in one drug overdose death in the city of Ripon, where Vice President Harris recently visited, and a couple of them are juveniles that were charged in that homicide in relation to the delivery. And these are circumstances that a family can do everything right, and they're not able to stop the scourge of fentanyl from taking a loved one. We have seen stories from across the country, whether at Lake and Riley to Prairie du Chien, with these issues, and it's creating a tremendous stress on our criminal justice system with the work that law enforcement is doing on the front end of trying to identify individuals that are in the country illegally, committing crimes. If they don't have a fingerprint identification system, that can prevent challenges. And talking to Sheriff Schmidt earlier, his agency recently purchased 6 of those, which can help identify who those individuals are because they may not have identification, and that can make law enforcement job much more difficult. And then when we have some of these very serious crimes that result in a hospital stay, we know that some of our hospitals struggle with bed space, and that can create various issues as well. That there are issues that go beyond just the stories that we see in the news, and it's happening day in and day out across Wisconsin and across the country, but they're all avoidable. And one of the things we've had to do in Fond du Lac County, we've had enough cases come in where we need an interpreter time slot so we can handle those cases, and that had to be expanded to a second time slot because we have so many of those cases, and they can take 20 minutes for one case with the translation, which sucks up the prosecutor time, public defenders, courts, clerks, and adds to the cost that taxpayers are having to fund. And when we have more illegal immigrants that are being prosecuted for crime, sometimes our jails operate at thin margins, and counties are having to look at building new jails, not solely because of that, but that's part of the issue. And we're looking at that in Fond du Lac County, and a county our size is looking at well over $100 million to consider building a jail. And those are real costs to taxpayers in our community. And I want to just share a much more minor personal experience that I had that pales in comparison to the loss that Rick, Aaron, and so many others have suffered from fentanyl. But I was driving in the city of Fond du Lac last April, and I was rear-ended while driving, and then pulled over, and I was rear-ended again. And the person that hit me fled the scene. And I am appreciative that his license plate fell off his truck so that we were able to identify him. And it was a day where it was the first warm April day of the year, and law enforcement was slammed. So I was waiting over 45 minutes as our law enforcement was responding to more serious calls. Had to take my passenger to the hospital to be evaluated for a concussion, and thankfully she was doing well. But ultimately, the guy actually came back to the scene as well because he thought we were gone. And during the investigation, we found out that he was in the country illegally, and he didn't have insurance, and it ended up totaling my vehicle. And as you might recall, trying to buy a vehicle around April of 2013 was quite expensive with inflation and the limited inventory. And those are consequences that people suffer day in and day out across the country, which are much more minor, but can have a significant impact on those that don't have significant financial means with those type of violations. And so we have individuals that are suffering from the consequences of crime committed by illegal immigrants. And I do want to just close by noting America is a nation of immigrants that offers hope for a better life, a safer future, and we are that shining city on a hill, and that's why people seek to come here. My family experienced that. My great-grandfather came to America from Lebanon. My grandfather fought in World War II. My dad was a police officer. I have the honor of being a district attorney, and we know immigrants have built our nation, and we support it, but it has to be done legally to prevent the consequences and the crime that we're seeing and the fentanyl that's pouring across our borders. And we appreciate you taking the time to be here to listen and hear the concerns that we're experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. We're going to proceed under the 5-minute rule. Sheriff Schmidt, I think you have a hard stop. Is that correct, at 11:30?
I built in a little bit of extra time.
So I would like to pose a question before you leave here. Some states have made compliance with ICE mandatory, but Wisconsin is not one of them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would requiring counties to comply with ICE help prevent these repeat offenders? So you perhaps heard the story up in Russ County where you had a repeat offender drunk driver, ran a truck driver off the road. He's now dead. 3 daughters, no longer have a father. By requiring compliance with ICE, could some of those situations be caused to not occur?
Absolutely. We struggle as sheriffs under the current law with even maintaining somebody just on an ICE detainer. Once their crimes have been resolved and we have no additional reason to hold them, the detainer, as is written today, does not allow sheriffs to hold somebody for ICE so they can continue that process. In addition, there are many agencies that have told me they will not comply with ICE, period. And that tells me that individuals are breaking the law, and whether that be federal or local law, and they're getting away with it. And what does that tell? When you're not holding somebody accountable for their crimes, that enables them to commit additional crimes. And having that mandate that you must comply with ICE certainly would help be that carrot and stick to make sure that we are holding individuals accountable when they break the law.
Thank you. Mr. Rockwell, so in testimony that we received in Washington, D.C. from Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas, we also had Sheriff Mark Daniels from the border, Cochise County, Arizona there, and they gave 2 diametrically opposed responses to the question in regards to fentanyl coming into the United States. Secretary Mayorkas said it is not tied to the open border. Sheriff Daniels, who is in Cochise County on the border with Mexico, said it has had a direct impact since January 20th of 2021 when we've had these open borders with the amount of fentanyl coming into this country. Which one do you believe is correct?
I believe that it has a direct effect. The fentanyl's flooding in. We talked about earlier, the gotaways, it's coming through. It's so small, so potent that it's easy to conceal. With the resources that it's taken to process all the immigrants coming into this country, I don't know how they could do their job.
Yeah, as you've talked to law enforcement, perhaps other officials, since the day that you lost Logan, have they alluded at all that the amount of fentanyl has increased exponentially over the last few years? Do any of them share that with you?
We have not had much contact with law enforcement in regard to that area, but I undoubtedly it's increasing exponentially.
So since you started your foundation, I'm assuming you've run into that you've had much more contact with families that have suffered the same fate as your family. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. We come in contact with, we've come in contact with hundreds. And then, I mean, in networks, I mean, we have contact with thousands of people that are in the same situation that we are.
Do they have a consistent message of how this could have been prevented?
Well, it definitely can be prevented by stopping the source, that's for sure. It's a multifaceted approach, but stopping the supply would definitely help.
Thank you for coming here today. I just want to put a question to Mr. Curtis. So if we have 4 more years of what has happened since January 20th of 2021, is this situation going to get better or worse for the United States of America?
Sir, I think obviously our focus was on one small community, but I think that kind of answers the question that if you extrapolate this across the country, I think there's just been so much focus on large municipalities, whether it's Chicago or New York or Dallas, Phoenix, and those are certainly concerning situations. But if you just look at proportionally what's happening in some of these cities, 1,000 immigrants may not be much in a place like Chicago, but and the police chief made clear that was a very conservative number based on the number of students in the district. Obviously, as we've talked about this morning, as Senator Johnson pointed out, there are a lot of individuals coming across the border that are single individuals with no children. So the point being, that estimate by the police chief, he has noted himself as conservative. So you have a municipality that's seeing their population increase by 10%. So extrapolate that across the country. And this has devastating consequences. Certainly we talked about the human toll, but one of the things we focused on in our report is just really kind of the meat and potato of running a local government, right? This is why the city of Whitewater is looking to referendum in spring of 2025 for not only city operations, i.e. the police force, but also the school district. So that's the taxpayers of Whitewater now facing 2 separate referenda in one spring election because they simply can't meet the obligations.
My time is up, but I want to ask one other real quick question. In your paper, it alludes to discussions were being that the city of Whitewater wanted to have with the governor's office, and the governor's office insisted on this being a private discussion. Why would that be? Put it this way: did you were you ever told why they insisted that this be a private discussion and not a public meeting for what is a very public problem?
So first, to be clear, we actually interviewed nobody for this report. We intentionally focused on the 400 records that were provided by the city because it was an objective review. And when I say records, I'm using that in the legal sense, where one record may be an email with numerous attachments. So it's fair to say we reviewed thousands of pages of records in this situation. And so we just wanted to see what the situation was in the words of city officials. Private communications that are obviously ultimately public records. So obviously I'd be guessing as to kind of the motivation behind the governor's office, but it's fair to say I think there maybe was concern with respect to the eligibility that the city had for funding that wasn't available. And obviously I think there was concern that despite all the issues happening, state funding, federal funding was simply unavailable to the city.
Yeah, thank you very much. For those that may be interested, this is a very well-researched document put out by the Institute for Reforming Government. It's worth a read. I now recognize a representative from Florida for his questioning.
Mr. Kinson, did I understand the end of your testimony to be that in Whitewater there are classes now in the school district where half the kids don't speak English?
Not English learners. I mean, they are English learners.
Yeah, their English is a second language.
Correct.
So how do the teachers deal with that?
Well, one of the ways is we actually have a second teacher who translates. One of the ways is that we have a second teacher there who translates.
And so who bears the cost of that?
Well, the district.
And is that one of the reasons why the local governments are having to pursue referenda, is just the cost structure? Or how does that get absorbed by the district if you're doubling your labor costs in some of those classrooms?
Well, the district's never going to tell you that, right? Instead, money's fungible. So they'll say, well, we need it for the roofs, right? Well, they spent the money for the roof somewhere else. But, aside from the money, it affects the educational outcomes. Honestly, that's what concerns me more than the money. is that the educational outcomes for the other kids, it affects them all. There is no cohort in Whitewater of kids, cohorts, educational speak for any subgroup of kids, that's not testing below average. Boys, girls, native speakers, ESL, they're all below average.
And that wasn't the case before this influx of migrants, right?
Right, it's been a steady decline.
So what do you say to those who say, like, this is your obligation? We're the richest country in the world. We have all the benefits of being Americans, and really, it's the duty that we have to open our doors and invite migrants to come here and utilize our services.
Yeah, their kids don't go to Whitewater.
And why do you say that?
Well, the people who are most likely to say that are sending their kids to a public school, or more likely a private school, where they probably don't have 1 or 2 English learners in their classrooms.
Really, so it's the public schools with the working class people that you're testifying bear the brunt of this, not the people who have the money and maybe just even the time, to be able to drive your kid outside the district to another school.
Well, take our representatives, for example. Tammy Baldwin doesn't have any kids in the Whitewater schools. She doesn't have kids, right? Governor Evers doesn't have any kids in the Whitewater schools. But Governor Evers came by to say Lincoln was a success story. Lincoln is not a success story. 80% of the kids were testing below average, or were not at grade level in 5th grade. That's not a success story. That I think that's in spite of the efforts that these teachers are taking on a Herculean task, right? So this is no reflection on the teachers at all. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are teachers, but they're fighting, they're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, to what extent is this just the front end of the wave? Is every town going to be Whitewater soon? Here there was a unique circumstance where there was excess housing available, there was a need for work in agriculture. So, like, what substantial percentage now of the town are these migrants who've taken up there, right?
Well, I think what happens is that there's a critical mass, right? If you have 1 or 2 kids in a classroom that aren't English speakers, it's not going to set back the instruction. But you get to a certain critical mass, and then all of a sudden, it affects everybody. And what is that critical mass? I'm sure there's some person smarter than me who can tell you that, but we're at it.
Yeah, I wonder, because I actually know a little bit about that. When there's a student who is not speaking with proficiency or learning at proficiency, it's very different than when you got a third, half the class that caused the teacher to have to not even teach to the middle of the class, but to teach to the bottom of the class, really. And then you don't get that achievement. I think that the people who want open borders are willing to accept that as like just an acceptable cost of open borders. That if students don't do as well, if our hospitals, if our schools are overrun and overburdened, that's okay so long as we're serving this broader goal that they have of open borders. And that just strikes me as cruel. It's cruel that you would subject students to diminished learning for this social experiment. Do you have any other reasonable explanation for it?
I don't, and in fact, you see that dynamic at Whitewater because it's a liberal town. So a town that used to be really focused on education, now all of a sudden are totally disinterested in test results. You just never see them talked about, right? And when I bring them up, I'm the devil there. They totally don't want to talk about it, right? And it's like, well, like I said, our school board president sends their kids somewhere else.
Well, I appreciate you being here. My time's expired, but I would think that rising student achievement would be something that could unite people, even of different political persuasions, and the things that diminish that achievement should be dealt with and not just accepted as a cost of doing business. But thank you very much for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize the representative from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Sheriff Schmidt, a few weeks ago, Tulare County Sheriff Mike Boudreau testified before this committee that the Sinaloa cartel has already sunk deep roots into his county in California. Their activities include the murder of cartel opponents, rampant extortion of small businesses, and criminal activities that include drug and human trafficking. He testified that the cartel was so well organized that they'd actually divided the state into regions with their own regional units, including assassination units. He's fighting the Sinaloa cartel in California, and You're waging the same battle 1,500 miles away in Wisconsin. Tell us about the Sinaloa cartel that this administration has deliberately allowed into our communities.
Well, I'm hopeful that we don't get to the point of where California is. I think right now we have it to a point under control here in Wisconsin, as far as there's only a few of them, and they haven't gotten to the point of what you're seeing in California. But obviously, if we don't take action when we make the initial arrest and we just let them go into the wind and continue their operations, that's going to enable the leaders of the cartel to say, look, they're not doing anything to us in Wisconsin. What can we do now because they let us get away?
If we continue down this road another 4 years, what do you anticipate?
I anticipate we'll have additional, just like we're seeing across the country with the Tren de Aragua. We're going to see this happen here as well with this cartel.
Now, what kind of crimes are they responsible for? I mean, these are not exactly Rotary Club recruits.
Right. No, these are individuals that in our areas we're seeing fentanyl overdose, fentanyl distribution, methamphetamine distribution, pushing drugs. That's what we're seeing right now. Obviously, that grows as they become more prevalent in our communities. Right now, we are concerned because we don't want more families like you heard from here today. And that's what we're going to see if that continues.
We're seeing some 300 a day, I'm told, on average across the country. Sheriff Boudreau estimated that fully half of the crime that he's now dealing with is due to illegal migrants. A few weeks before that, NYPD officials estimated that about 75% of the crime that they're now dealing with in Manhattan is due to illegal migrants. What percentage of the crimes would you estimate that you're dealing with are now due to illegal migrants in your county?
I believe it's growing. It's a much lower rate yet. We still have hope here. I think we're probably in the 20% range, 15 to 20, but it's growing.
How rapidly has this condition developed?
Over the last 4 years is when it really has started to rear its ugly head. Before that, we had slow incremental growth. There's been that growth. But over the last 4 years, it's really exploded, and we're seeing it especially in the drug area.
Sheriff Boudreau testified that according to his discussions with his counterparts across the country, the problems that he was describing in his own county and that you've described in yours are becoming typical of communities throughout America. Have you discussed this with other sheriffs, and what are they saying?
As I said earlier, yeah, we've talked about it. I asked the other sheriffs for examples, and there was no shortage of supply of examples across our state of these various types of crimes. And in my neighboring county of Columbia County, he couldn't break it down into individuals. He just said, there's a bunch of these various types of sexual assaults. We're seeing a lot of sexual assault types crimes, things that you would never accept here. It's almost like part of their culture. We're seeing the sexual assaults and the drug offenses, homicides, scams across the variety of all the different crimes that we see. They're pushing it here.
Mr. Curtis, what we seem to be seeing is that illegal migrants concentrate in very large numbers in very short periods of time in small towns and then completely overwhelm those local communities. So a lot of communities haven't faced this yet. But for those that do, the effects are devastating. What would you say to those communities that have not yet seen this influx into their towns and neighborhoods?
Great question, sir. Unfortunately, a lot of this does come down to resources. As we've heard from a school district standpoint, you need to be prepared if you're going to see this influx of ESL students. But frankly, I would argue it even goes, unfortunately, beyond that, right? A lot of the school resource officers in Whitewater, according to the emails that we reviewed, really spend a significant amount of their time simply doing home visits to identify, why students aren't attending. The truancy rates have significantly increased in the district. So these are really basic issues, almost operational issues that school districts have to be prepared for. And obviously, the sheriff and the district attorney have noted some of the law enforcement concerns.
So if it hasn't come to your community, it's going to, if this continues. And if it's in your community, it's going to grow if this continues. Is that essentially what the two of you are telling me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields. I'll recognize the gentleman from Oregon for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the panel for being here. Kamala Harris, just a little over a month ago, made a statement regarding violence against women, and she was stating this on the anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, and at the end of her statement she says, as we reflect on the life-changing progress we've made over the past 30 years, we recommit to the critical work ahead together alongside survivors, advocates, allies. President Biden and I will continue to do everything in our power to ensure that every woman throughout America has freedom to live safe from violence and hate. She said that, and yet at the same time the Biden administration has allowed 1/3 of the folks that came across the border are from Central America. Let me read this. Gender-based violence in Latin America has the highest rate. Latin America has the highest rate of gender-based violence in the world, according to the Wilson Center. 1/3 of the folks that came in, the 6 million, 2 million, are from Central America. And so we hear President Trump state that folks from south of the border are rapists. He was speaking in, obviously, generalities. But the specific point was made the other day in front of our Judiciary Committee by April Aguirre, who came in and talked, a crime victim advocate, saying how the attitude toward women in Central America is horrible. The question to you, Sheriff, is how in the world, when we have people that come in where women are second-class citizens in many respects, and you can look it up, Google it, in these countries, how in the world are we going to do something about it now that we have all these folks from those areas here? And this is real, and this was brought home to us in graphic detail by Ms. Aguirre in front of our committee just 2 months ago. And she was disdainful of the assertion that somehow we could fix this. And she was pointing at the culture in Central America. And I hate to be saying that everybody from that country is that way. I'm sure they are not. But definitely there is that attitude, and you can look it up. Gender inequality is rampant there. I don't know why the Biden administration is busy saying it's doing everything for women when it's allowing this kind of thing to happen. Well, here we are. And as I asked the senator, what are we going to do about it? Sheriff, I don't expect you to have all the answers, but I went back and forth on whether to ask the school board member what to do about it, because it seems like a training thing. But in your opinion, what do you think?
Well, I can say I don't have the resources. I don't have the resources to do what we need to do about it. You take a look at the issues that we have about that 12-year-old girl that was almost sexually assaulted, in the process of being sexually assaulted, just north of our county line that I talked about earlier. You talk about the sexual assaults that we hear about all the time. You hear about the human trafficking, whether it be sex trafficking or labor trafficking. These are very real issues. I don't have the resources. I have 7 detectives for my county of 900 square miles, and I don't have the resources to do that. It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take the community to come together to be able to do this.
And
I don't have the answer.
And you're speaking at how are we going to protect people now that we are in this situation? In that regard, we had a situation in Southern Oregon where a cartel member was raising huge quantities of marijuana. Southern Oregon is a wonderful place to grow it, and many, many people are there doing it illegally. And a water master went down to try to shut off the water that they were stealing for their marijuana grow. And the head of the cartel running that particular grow came up to him with an AK-47 and said, "You can't do anything to me because I'm invisible. I'm invisible." So my question to you is, was he right? Was that cartel member right? Because when they do a raid, people scatter into the woods. There's no way to find them. So my question to you is, are you encountering that same thing, and is the response, you need more help? What is the response?
I think you're dead on. They do become invisible. We don't know who they are. We can't track them down, and I think you're spot on. I think it's it becomes more and more difficult for us to. We even have a picture of somebody. I can't put a name with them because we don't have a proper identification for them, and I think you're spot on. And we need a lot more resources, and we need to know who these people are, and what they represent and what their background is.
Thank you. I am struck by what, again, the senator was pointing out is this huge problem that we now have, and how in the world do we deal with it? And it looks as if one of the ways is going to be to encourage and support law enforcement more. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I recognize one of the gentlemen from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Rockwell, Rick, and Aaron, thank you for being here today. Because of the networks you described earlier that you've been able to develop and the conversations you've had with other parents that unfortunately have suffered what you have gone through, what are, and you talked about kind of the elected officials maybe getting more involved or doing specific things. What are some of those things that you could relay kind of to the full committee today that you see would be, clearly things that need to be done and done as quickly as possible?
Sure. Again, our main focus is the education and awareness. So one of the things would be making sure that these young children in our country are educated at an earlier age or educated at all, and not leaving it up to the families of the victims to do that work. Having some mandated education on, this, as a foundation, Aaron and I and our members are not going to stop the flow of fentanyl. We can only do as much as we can with the education and awareness. So that's one of the big things that would help us.
You have a relationship, I'm sure you do, with law enforcement, and were there things that maybe happened on campus and that were repeated that you think could be avoided? Maybe more awareness, or what are some of the strategies you think that could work?
Sure, definitely. And one of the big things that I mentioned too was the stigma. So we get a lot of resistance when we talk to schools or talk to like the university. When we first started talking to the university after Logan passed away, we didn't realize that there was this big need for this awareness until 9 months later when another young man, Cade, passed away from the same pill, and we asked the university, was anything done? They didn't even. There was no awareness made to any of the kids, so there needs to be. They get alerts when there's a storm coming. These kids need to know that these dangers are out there, and you hear about bad batches and stuff, but there's no bad batches anymore. Fentanyl is just bad at all together, so they just need this awareness. And so one of the things that happened with us talking to the school is they are now more receptive. They have gotten Narcan installed, which I'm not going to get into that, but that through our efforts and other nonprofits, we've gotten Narcan installed in primarily all the UW campuses in Wisconsin. So that's a great thing. Just knowing the signs, getting that education. Now at UWM, they're having education in their orientation, so they're actually talking about it when the kids first come into school. So those are the things we need. It's just that awareness. I know it's not going to 100% get rid of the issue, but that would help.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. And I do apologize too. Congressman Tiffany asked me the question about talking to the law enforcement earlier, and my nerves just got to me. But I did want to. We do work with the DEA in Washington.
Right. And
the question was brought to me about how, the flow of fentanyl, and I did want to bring this up because I felt bad because I kind of froze up. But if I'm correct with my numbers, just in 2023, the DEA confiscated almost 80 million fentanyl pills and almost 30,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. That's almost 15 tons. So if you equate that back to the 2 milligrams that's considered a lethal dose, that's like 6.5 billion doses that could kill. Million lethal doses. So I'm sorry, 6.5 billion doses.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the DA kind of the more technical aspect of this. Right now, we've had a bill the last two Congresses to actually label fentanyl as a Schedule I narcotic. That bill is not passed, which is just simply unbelievable to me at this point. And if you talk to people, members of Congress, they're amazed by this too, why we can't get this done. From a DEA's perspective, how do you view crimes or certainly anything related to a Schedule I narcotic? And do you think it would make a difference when it comes to prosecuting some of these crimes related to fentanyl?
I think it definitely has the opportunity to help. We know the danger that fentanyl is and just how potent it is, and it's taken very seriously. But once you start putting drugs into that Schedule I category, that certainly gives us more tools, and we'll take any tools that you're able to give us that can help us prosecute these cases.
Gentleman yields, and now recognize Mr. Van Orden for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Sheriff, thanks for coming out. Thank you for your work. I appreciate it greatly. We can, I think, across the board, we recognize the fact that this is a abject failure on the federal government's part like no other, directly relating to Vice President Harris's Boer-Zardum. I think we can just agree with that. And again, I want to thank Mr. Pocan and Ms. Moore for coming to this incredibly vital hearing that has affected tens of thousands of Wisconsinites on a daily basis. So actually, I just think that's pathetic. They couldn't bother to find time in their day to come here to talk about this issue that's killing our citizens. Sheriff, have you been given any guidance from the Evers State House about how you should be dealing with this illegal alien issue that we're having here for reporting or money or anything at all?
The Evers administration has not communicated with me much at all. I've attempted several times, both as the sheriff and as the president of Badger Sheriffs, to have open communications, but my attempts have gone to interns, and it's taken weeks and months before I even get a return call from anybody. There is zero communication between me and the Evers administration.
All right, so put it into context for folks that aren't from Wisconsin. You're the head of the Badger Sheriff's Association. You're one of 72 sheriffs, the most senior constitutionally elected law enforcement official in your county, correct?
That's correct.
And the governor of the state of Wisconsin has not contacted you about an issue that's been killing hundreds, if not thousands, of Wisconsinites for years now?
He has not contacted me, and he's been very scarce to most sheriffs in the state.
Okay. District Attorney Tony, have you been given any guidance by the mighty Josh Call about how you should be handling this issue with Wisconsinites being brutally kidnapped, raped, murdered, and poisoned?
So we, as district attorneys, are independent from the Department of Justice as far as how we prosecute cases.
Yep.
One of the challenges that we face in cases when we're trying to get evidence tested is limits on what we can now send to the crime labs run by the Department of Justice and slower turnaround times in some of those categories that there was recently a study by the Legislative Audit Bureau where of the judges that responded, I think the number was north of 60 or 70% that were having to reschedule cases because they didn't have test results, that was slowing down cases that we're having in court, which bottles things up, delays justice, and makes it more difficult for prosecutors in the courtrooms.
So, Mr. District Attorney, could you say that District Attorney Josh Call has an understanding that there's a fentanyl issue in the state of Wisconsin?
I would have to believe that he has an understanding of that. There may be some, I think, stark differences in how some of us would look to combat that compared to his approach.
So we can reasonably assume that the sitting Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin is aware that there's a fentanyl crisis with the citizens in the state of Wisconsin. We can also reasonably assume that he has some contact with law enforcement. And if law enforcement on both sides wearing the suit and wearing the badge are saying exactly the same thing to you, but Governor Evers and Josh Call refuse to do anything about this fentanyl crisis, what does that say about Governor Evers and Josh Call?
Well, it's disappointing when we don't see some of those resources that we need. The types of cases that are coming through are getting more complicated, that are taking more and more time just to review it for charging, to make sure that we're getting justice for families, because not every family is even going to have a case make it to the courtroom if they lost a loved one to fentanyl overdose.
So, Sheriff, when someone calls into 911, is the first question that your 911 operator asks someone what their political party affiliation is?
It's a question that is never asked.
It's never asked. So, Mr. District Attorney, when you're thinking about prosecuting a case, do you ask people what their political party affiliation is?
No.
Okay, you don't. So if the cops aren't asking what the political party affiliation is, and the person that's going to prosecute somebody isn't asking what the political party affiliation is, don't you think that Governor Evers and President Biden and Vice President Harris should stop asking those questions? There's no way, it's statistically impossible, that they magically remove the 91 plus executive actions from President Trump, like just happenstance. Oops, they all had to deal with the border. Now we have this crisis. We've had 200,000 plus Americans die of fentanyl poisoning, right? It's actually about 300 a day. Imagine a jumbo jet crashing every single day that would be dealt with. So the Biden administration under the Harris stardom and Governor Evers right down the road here and his buddy Josh Call have politicized this, and our American citizens are dying because of it. It's pathetic. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Representative Stile for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Biden-Harris administration's policies are having a real impact here in the state of Wisconsin. I think it's worth our time to reflect just on the case study of what's happened in Whitewater, Wisconsin, due to the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. I'll start with you. You've done, Mr. Curtis, you've done great research into this. You've seen a significant influx of migrants into Whitewater, as noted by the chief of police's letter that says he's estimating roughly 1,000 migrants. Do you think the 1,000 number is accurate?
Well, certainly in the records we reviewed, it's accurate, but I think I noted earlier, the sheriff, or excuse me, the police chief himself has noted that is likely a conservative number. There were some individuals that challenged that estimate, and his response was, I think this is conservative, I'm paraphrasing, because again, that's based on the district population.
I agree it's roughly, and it's based on the school district numbers, right?
Correct.
So what are the school district numbers that give rise to 1,000 estimate?
I think it's 200 to 300, I think in that range, and again, that fluctuates year to year.
A rough 200 to 300 person increase in a school district. I'll go to you, Mr. Kinson. How many students are in the school district of Whitewater? 1,200. So 1,200, you've seen an increase in roughly 200 students over the past 2 to 3 years?
2 years, it increased 50%.
An increase of 50% of English second language
Yes.
students, but an increase in
It was
absolute
200 to
numbers.
300, just roughly
200 to 300 students in a school district of
1,200.
1,200. That is a very significant percent increase in the school district. And then in your testimony, you walk us through the real-world impact that this has had on the school district and on children. As you correctly noted, you noted that special needs students has held reasonably steady, about 20% state average of 14. Students who are economically disadvantaged has held reasonably steady, about 50% state average, 45, but a significant increase in the needs of English as a second language in the school district. And then at the same time, you note the correlation of overall academic achievement. You've been a longtime resident in the city of Whitewater. You have students that are there. Could you walk through how the school achievement has fallen in the community of Whitewater as a result of this influx?
Well, the example I gave in my testimony was, I think the perfect illustration of this is Lincoln, one of the elementary school with the highest proportion of ESL kids. So 5th grade last year, they had 25% of that class was ESL. 80% of that class was not reading at grade level in English.
So I think this is really important. So let's just dive into Lincoln Elementary in the school district of Whitewater. 25% of the students are English as a second language, but 80% of the 5th graders are not reading at a 5th grade level.
That's right.
And so does that mean that not only is there a challenge to those students who English is a second language, but really that is impacting all the students in the classroom? Is that your understanding?
Yeah, well, there's no mystery to this, right? If you go to the Wisconsin DPI website, there are 3 drivers, like I said. It's special needs kids, economically disadvantaged, and ESL. That's it. You can determine what a school's outcome is going to be based on that. As you raise one, right, the test scores are going to drop. It's invariable. And it's not just Wisconsin or Whitewater, it's across the country.
So every mom and dad who has a child in the Whitewater school district is being negatively impacted by the Biden-Harris administration border policies, by the Biden-Harris administration catch and release policies. That is directly impacting every student in the Whitewater school district. And when we extrapolate that out and we look statewide and nationwide, it's actually impacting almost everyone. And it uniquely impacts hardworking families in school districts that are not uniquely affluent. Moms and dads who have unlimited cash flow find ways to take care of their children. They drive to another school district. You noted in your testimony some people drive to Elkhorn School District. Some people move to school districts or send their children to private schools with their own resources.
Or better yet, they don't come to Whitewater, right? That's the other dynamic I didn't talk about. If you're a parent and you care about your kids, you're not moving to Whitewater. That's the sorry truth of it. We had it's a university town. When I grew up, all the professors' kids went to Whitewater. Now they don't.
I grew up 20 minutes away. I know the city well, and the impact that the Biden-Harris administration policies are having in Whitewater is really just an example of the horrific policy impact that this is having across our state and across our country. This is why securing the U.S.-Mexico border is absolutely essential, not just for all the students in the community of Whitewater, but for students across our state. Cognizant of my time, I'd go on and dive into some of the drug trafficking issues that we've seen in Whitewater as well. But Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize Representative Grothman for his questioning.
Thanks. First, a little comment. I've been down on the border many times. And one of the things you hear if you talk to Border Patrol or the people who have to analyze or interview the people coming across is all the sexual assaults going on at the southern border. That is one of the prices that people have to pay for this open border policy. I again and again hear, and I talked to the woman last time I was down there who did examine everybody, and she told me, yeah, it's something we see all the time. So that's one of the prices that has to be paid by the women of this current situation. And you hear again and again they're putting even young girls on the pill because they expect they'll be sexually assaulted, which is just almost beyond belief. There's a southern border. Now, we don't have any Democrats here today, but if they were here, what they say is, well, sure, that there have been crimes committed by some people here illegally, but it's no large amount, or it's no more than the native-born population. I have talked to many judges, other DAs from my district prior to this hearing today, and one of the things I hear is that nobody knows, really, I don't know how anyone can make that statement, because nobody knows how many crimes in this country are being committed by illegals. If I go to one of the state prisons of my district, they have no idea how many people in that prison are here illegally. If I talk to somebody, how many people in your jail, county people, are here illegally, they have no idea. If I say last year in the United States there were 15,000 murders, how many were committed by illegals, nobody knows. I'd like to ask, I guess, both Sheriff Schmidt and District Attorney Tony, does anybody keep track of how many crimes in this country are committed by illegals, or is that just a number, despite the blizzard of paperwork that is required out of Washington, nobody knows?
I think you're right on par with what you're saying. We really don't know. Mr. McClintock asked me a percentage. I had to guess because I don't know how many people are committing crimes in our areas. I'm unique in my county because I have a holding facility for immigration. So we have the ability to, once they're booked in, we're able to identify if they're supposed to be here or not. But I'm one of very, very few across the country that have that ability. And most of the time when they get booked in until a couple days later, even I don't know that. So there's no way for us to even know that.
District Attorney Tony, if we talk about the number of murders, fatality by drunk driving, whatever, in the last years, does anybody in Fond du Lac County tell us what percentage of serious crimes are committed by illegals?
Most of the crimes that come in, we don't know the immigration status of somebody. When we look at the border crisis, we see crime that's related to people coming here illegally and crime related to the drugs that are being done by American citizens.
And if you don't know in Fond du Lac County, for sure nationwide.
Well, there's a reason every judge reads an immigration warning in state court when there's a conviction. It doesn't matter if they're a citizen or not. The court is supposed to read that because we simply don't always know the immigration status.
Okay. Do we have a special problem when it comes to people here, immigrants coming here, in that the victims are reluctant to report crimes to law enforcement, in part because there's a kind of a solidarity in ethnic groups? Is that a problem?
We see challenges with reporting crime if somebody is afraid they could be deported or otherwise removed from the country where they may be not willing to
And even if they're here legally, there is some solidarity, right, Sheriff
Yes.
Schmidt? There's solidarity in saying, no, we're not going to turn Jimmy in for the sexual assault.
And there's cultural issues as well that sometimes they won't cooperate with law enforcement because of their culture or because of the potential crime that's being investigated.
Okay, and do we have another problem, which people mention, particularly from the Latin American culture, in which people are giving different last names at different times depending upon whether they're arrested? This is a special problem we maybe don't have with American, but people who grow up in that culture, all of a sudden one day it's Morales Rodriguez, the next day it's Rodriguez Morales. Is that a problem?
Different last names, different first names, different birth dates, different everything. Yes.
And we'll run criminal histories, and we'll see a list of aliases at times where it becomes difficult to track and match some of those records.
Do we have another problem, and I think District Attorney Tony, you kind of mentioned this, that people, perhaps victims of human trafficking, may be threatened with, we're going to turn you in and you might be deported, which is another challenge for law enforcement that you don't have with the native born. Is that true?
We do have challenges with those that are in the country illegally. There is a U visa system to try and help make sure we can have those witnesses or victims here, but that gets slammed with people applying that shouldn't even be applying, taking spaces away from those victims that we need here.
Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's true.
Do we have another problem? There's a cultural difference between people coming here and the native born. Is it accurate to say that maybe in other cultures, drunk driving is not to be taken as seriously as it is in this country?
I don't think I could speak to that.
I don't know the particular cultures, but I'm sure there is some aspect of that.
Okay. Same thing following up with regard to sex with a minor. I think maybe is it accurate to say that, you know, in this country maybe we'd be alarmed if a 14 or 15-year-old gal was involved, you know, sexual activity. Perhaps in other countries it's not considered quite as big a deal.
Well, you know, I just had an exchange with a social worker where we were dealing with the underage sex, and the social worker described it as a cultural difference. And one of the challenges that we see when people are coming here illegally, they're not looking at what our laws are before coming here. That's, I think, something that we routinely see that happens.
Okay. Same thing with regard to perhaps physical abuse in domestic relationships. Is there another maybe a little cultural difference there?
Well, one of the cases that I referenced, it's a domestic violence case, a brutal stabbing that we have set for trial in November, so I don't want to get into much of the details, but we do see those challenges.
Okay.
As do we.
That's true. Okay. Well, there was a lot of good questions to get in there. I guess I'll have to give the rest of the time back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for those excellent questions. Appreciate it very much. If everyone's questions have been asked and answered, that will conclude today's hearing. We thank all of our witnesses for appearing before the committee. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.